So, in my book, there's a chapter that's called Lifelong Caterpillars, and it's derived from a meme that really speaks to me. And the meme is of two insects having a conversation over coffee. There's a caterpillar and a butterfly. And the caterpillar is looking at the butterfly and saying, "You've changed." And the butterfly is looking back at the caterpillar saying, "We're supposed to." Now, as use Brother Joey's word, there's some depth to this meme right here, brother. There's a whole story happening here. And as Bishop and Glenn would say, it's deep. So on one level, we can see it's just two insects having a conversation. But on a deeper, perhaps more meaningful level, what I think is really going on here is the caterpillar is having a conversation with its potential. The caterpillar is having a conversation with the version of itself that God intended it to become. Matthew 5:48 says, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." Is a butterfly not the perfected version of a caterpillar? And you can almost see with the butterfly's look on its face, it's kind of squinting, looking at the caterpillar saying like, you'd be a lot more grateful if you knew what God had in store for you. As indicated by the universe inside the butterfly's wings, and that is not there by accident. Because if you become the version of yourself that God created you to be, if you are perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect, is there any limits to what you can accomplish for his kingdom? And that's what we all want, right? We all want to become the version of ourselves that God intended us to become. Which begs the question, why don't we? It's called default. The villain in my book. What is default? Francis Xavier said it best. He said, "If you give me the child until he is 7, I will show you the man." What he was talking about was an area in our brain called the default mode network. And there's plenty of literature to back this up. The circumstances, the events that happen in those first 7 years, roughly speaking, are observed in behaviors when we are adults. To put it plainly, our personal reality as children becomes our personality as adults. And so if you witnessed mom and dad together one week off the next, being verbally or physically abusive to one another, is it any wonder whenever you have peace and serenity in your personal life, you sabotage it? You're ungrateful for the goodness. Because that's what love looked like to you when you were a child. And so you default back to that place and space. You stay a lifelong caterpillar. A caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly, by the way. That is self-sabotage personified. Or I guess it'd be insectified. And I can go on and give a myriad of examples when it comes to self-sabotaging activities, because I've done them all. But it's not the external that keeps us stuck, that keeps us holding a grudge instead of being grateful, shaking our fist at God. It's not the external, it's the internal. Stories that are either explicitly thought or implicitly felt that sound or feel like, I am unworthy, I am not good enough, I am not lovable, I am miserable, I deserve to be miserable, I'm better off alone, I'm better off dead. And so we live the life of a victim. Instead of being grateful for the struggle. What's the definition of a story, by the way? The definition of a story is a character who wants something and has to overcome conflict to get it. Let me say it one more time. A story is a character who wants something and has to overcome conflict to get it. Without conflict, without struggle, without problems, without obstacles, there is no story. If we knew that our lives were stories, we would welcome the conflict. Heck, we would run towards the problem because we know that's what's needed in order to get what we want, which is becoming the version of ourselves that God created us to be. Amen? And how much more grateful would we be about that if we knew our lives are stories? We use the metaphors all the time, folks. Get your act together. Turn the page. Step into that role. It builds character. Our lives are stories. In fact, my mom used to always tell me, she said, Hunter, we can't rewrite what's already been written, but we can start a new chapter today. And I don't care how old you are. I don't care how long you've been a lifelong caterpillar. Because even a live dog has more hope than a dead lion. And only a dog goes back to its own vomit. And when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me. If I'm lying, I'm dying. Because I lived the life of a lifelong caterpillar for 20 years. My default was one of a victim. And I shook my fist at God. I wasn't grateful. I held a grudge for all the conflict in my life. When I was 3 years old, my mom took me away from my dad because he was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. He was getting pretty moody. So I didn't see my dad for about 10 years. And then I got reunited with him at the age of 13. A year later, died. So you can see how that fit my narrative, that fit my default. Why I stayed stuck in self-sabotage as a lifelong caterpillar. I got taken away from my dad as a toddler. He got taken away from me as a teenager. That sounds about right. I'm a victim. And so the 20-year self-sabotaging spree began as I headed into high school. Until I got into a really bad place. In Phoenix, Arizona, I was stranded with $44 in my name, alone, estranged from my then girlfriend, now wife, Tiffany. And I had to admit myself into cognitive behavioral therapy because I was this close to eating a bullet. And then, as Pastor Moody once said, Bishop J.R., I did my homework. And out came a book out of it a few years later. How grateful am I for that? Amen? And so that begs the question, how does it work? How do we get unstuck in this cyclical default of self-sabotage? How do we remain grateful for the struggles in our life? How do we become the version of ourselves that God intended us to become? It's very simple. 3 steps. 1, you put God first. 2, you go all in. 3, you run your race. Number 1, put God first. Now, I understand some of us might be thinking, we're in church, dude. Like, what are you talking about? Of course we're putting God first. Is God the Lord of your life in every area of your life? When I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me. I used to sell life insurance. I was really, really good at it. 300 cold calls a day was my thing. Buy or die. That was the game. Until a gentleman by the name of Mr. Jones picked up the phone. What I thought was going to be a 1-call close turned into a 6-hour conversation with a complete stranger. Now, God liked Mr. Jones and I, but at that point, yeah, we were complete strangers. I knew him, but I had never developed a relationship with him. Or as Bishop and I talked about this past week, I didn't have that lordship with him. And so I was talking to Mr. Jones. I was telling him all the things that I wanted to do in my life, all the books I wanted to write, all the people I wanted to speak to. There was a long pause. All of a sudden, this voice that sounds like Morgan Freeman in the movie Bruce Almighty comes over and says, "Put God first, or you will lose everything." Now, there's another thing about story that's worth mentioning. In order for a transformation to take place, the hero of the story needs a guide. There's always a guide. Think about it. Luke Skywalker had who? Obi-Wan. Harry Potter had who? Hagrid. Katniss Everdeen had who? Haymitch. And I could go on and on and on. Lifelong caterpillars do it alone. Victims do it alone. People stuck under the dominion of default, which is victimhood, do it alone. People who want to become the version of themselves that God created them to be, go with a guide. And what better guide than God? So put God first. Here's how I do it. I spend an hour with him every single morning, get up at 5, right to my office, and I will read the Bible until a verse or passage strikes me. I'll write that down verbatim, and then I'll craft a prayer based of that passage or verse. And then I will ask God, I will say, Lord, what do you want me to do in response to this passage and prayer? And even as I'm just mouthing the words, the answer permeates in my mind's eye like the bottom of an 8-ball, just kind of surfaces. And so I write that down and say a few things that I'm grateful for. And then the next day, I come back, and you see how that verse equipped me for the day. I see how that prayer equipped me for the day. I see what he wanted me to do in response for that day actually happened that day. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say that our lives are stories, because he's the author of our life. That's how I do it. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way. I'm just showing you a way. Put God first. Number 2, go all in. We have gifts. I believe that we all have gifts. Period. Amen. What are you doing with yours? What are you doing with yours? Do you flirt with it like I did for 20 years and then fall in love with the ways of the world instead? You put your toe in the water instead of jumping in? Are you a writer who doesn't write? Are you a painter who doesn't paint? Are you a singer who doesn't sing? It wasn't yours to begin with. God gave it to you for you to give it back to the world. What are you doing with it? Now, going all in looks different for everybody. How it looks for me, 1 hour a day. You can go all in on your gift 1 hour a day. Craft and cultivate that gift that God gave to you so you can give it back to the world. 1 hour a day for a year and a half came that. Go all in. Number 3, run your race. An old sprint coach of mine, Tony Holler, out of Plainfield, Illinois, he's got a saying that goes, speed grows like a tree. Same thing goes for your gift. It ain't going to happen overnight. But here's the thing about running your race. When you run your race, there's no competition. We fall victim to, we get ungrateful about when we start comparing or competing against other people who have similar gifts as we do. It was the last indoor meet of this season at Grand Valley, and I was in really good shape. I knew I was going to win the 400 meter that day. I was going to PR, going to win, and I'm out. First 200 meters in, it's neck and neck between this young man and I from Hope College. I can still see his orange and blue jersey just waving right in front of me. I'm right on this poor kid's heels. And then comes the final turn. And I default. I hear the roar of the crowd because he and I are neck and neck, and I make a critical error. There's a point in the 400 meter where you kick toward the end and give it all you got. It's unique to every individual. There isn't a specified space where everybody kicks at the same time. I kicked about 30 meters too early. And instead of winning that race, I took third. Because I was running against that young man instead of running my race. When you run your race, there's no competition. And here's the thing about running your race. As I said, your gift, it's like speed, grows like a tree. And in this quick fix society, I'm telling you, it ain't going to happen overnight. So then you have a choice to make. Are you going to be grateful for the time that it takes? Or are you going to hold a grudge? Are you going to default back to being a victim? Are you going to stay a lifelong caterpillar? Or are you going to do your homework? I was getting coffee with a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, David, in May of 23. This was about 2 months after I'd given my life to Christ. And he said, "Hunter, how you doing?" And as I was opening my mouth to speak, he interrupted. He said, No, how are you really? And I said, "I'm not anxious of the future, but I'm anticipatory. I'm ready to go. Like, what's next? Come on." He said, You know, Hunter, my youngest is really into bugs right now. And so we got him a bug house. And my father-in-law sent some caterpillars. They came in the mail yesterday. And so we took the caterpillars out. We put them in the bug house. And my youngest gets all excited. He looks at me and he goes, "When do they become butterflies?" I said, "Well, it's going to take a few weeks, bud." So I say that to say, when you put God first, when you go all in on the gift that He's given you, and then you start running your race, do not be shocked if things start getting hard. But no, that's part of the deal, right? Because the story is a character who wants something and has to overcome conflict to get it. So the waiting will be hard. In fact, it'll be really hard. I'm just keeping it real. So there might be a time when you are listening to His voice, you're going all in on your gift every single day, and while you're running your race, you might not be able to pay your mortgage. You might have to rely on Brother Benny to wear a pair of pants. These are Benny's pants that he gave me when I had nothing. Your in-laws are going to look at you like you are crazy. You're going to be humiliated. You're going to be emasculated. You're going to feel like the whole world is caving in around you. And the only thing that you're going to fall back on, because you know His voice and it is telling you to be still. Because that's what's needed for the chrysalis to start forming around the caterpillar, in order for it to become the version of itself that God intended it to be. And in the process of being still, the caterpillar has to undergo a process, as Bishop said. It's called holometabolism. Listen to me. Where the caterpillar has to voluntarily die from the inside out in order for it to transform into the version of itself that God intended for it to become. And David continued, he said, "You know, Hunter, here's the thing. Most people think it's the waiting that's the hardest part of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. It isn't. The hardest part of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly is when it has to come out. It cannot be aided in any way, shape, or form as it passes through that narrow gate, if you will. It has to struggle, because if it doesn't, quite literally, the fluid will not be drained sufficiently from its wings to be light enough for it to take flight. It has to struggle through in order to get what it wants, because the story is a character who wants something and has to overcome conflict to get it. And then once it's out, it's got to use things it hasn't used before to do something it's never done before. That sounds like faith. And so then when it was ready for me, when God was ready for me to come out after 6 months of not working, we're on a mortgage forbearance program. We hadn't paid our note in months. The only job I get is as a sandwich artist at Subway. Making sandwiches. September 8th, 2023, excuse me. I'm coming up. My friends, because I made my update on LinkedIn. I'm a sandwich artist at Subway at 401 Baldwin Street in Jenison, Michigan. My friends are looking, where's the guy that sold insurance? Where's the guy that was with Mr. Pena? Where's the gym owner? Where's the sprint coach consultant? You've changed. And I'm saying we're supposed to. And I'm struggling getting out. We can't make ends meet, barely. I'm getting paid $13 an hour to make subs. And then on November 1st, 2023, I get elevated to unit manager of that store. A little bit of a raise, but we're still not paying our mortgage. Still not be able to, we got one car. We just had to get rid of another one because, I was driving my wife to and from work with a car that had no power steering and no brakes. How do you drive a car with no brakes? With extreme difficulty. That's how. And so everybody's looking at me, and now my staff is looking at me because I'm a manager, and they're saying, well, you've changed. Saying we're supposed to. And then on March 27th of 2024, God elevates me again from single unit manager to multi-unit manager. I'm not just making subs at one store. No, I'm managing people now, 2 entirely different staffs at 2 entirely different locations. I'm raising up individuals to be my assistants at those stores. And now they're starting to see a little bit of what's going on. They're saying, you've changed. I'm saying, yeah, we're supposed to. Isn't this great? I'm starting to transform a little bit, becoming a little bit more grateful, seeing what God's doing with me, instead of shaking my fist at him. And then May 29th, the day after we get acquired by a conglomerate, God elevates me again, going from 2 stores to 8 like that as a district manager. I'm overseeing 8 stores and 100 employees when just 8 months before then I was making sandwiches. You know how many times I've had this conversation with my managers since that happened? I'm saying, you've changed. You've changed. I'm saying, we're supposed to. And so the solution is really simple. Really simple. Simple doesn't mean easy, because if it was easy, then everybody would do it. Put God first. Go all in on your gift. And run your race. That's it, right there. You have the formula. There it is. If you need more help, I got a book to sell you. It's called The Way. Out of self-sabotage into self-mastery. And then there's the cool part that's going to happen when you start doing that, because then when you change your story, you change your life. When you become the version of yourself or getting closer to the version of yourself that God intended you to become, people are going to start taking notice. People are going to start coming up to you. People are going to start wanting whatever it is that you've got. They're going to see that you've done your homework. They're going to see that you are flying high in the skies of salvation. They are going to see that you see things differently now, Brother Glenn, because you have a different perspective on everything, and they're going to see that you have so much grace for them because they're in the middle of their stuff, changing from a lifelong caterpillar to the version of themselves that God created them to be. They're going to give you grace then, so then they can struggle because they know a story is a character who wants something and has to overcome conflict to get it. Do you hear me? And that's how we multiplicatively expand God's kingdom in a mighty way. They're going to want what you've got. They're going to want a fraction of the action. They're going to want a tap of bread, Brother Mario. They're going to want a slice of the rice. And sooner or later, more and more of the conversations are going to happen where people are going to come up to you. And they're going to say, you've changed. And you're going to say, we're supposed to.